We're looking at Psalm 23. We're carrying on the summer. It doesn't feel like it's still summer out there, but we're going to persist and carry on with the summer. Psalm 23 is mostly read out at funerals. It's mostly read out at funerals. It's mostly read out like in a solemn, reflective place. And like most things that you say and think at funerals, like most things that you splurt out and you consider, you'd be well served to say them and to think them, not just in death, but for life. Do you know what I mean? Life would be fuller, wouldn't it, if we could have the mindset that we have in that moment at a funeral, when we speak out words of truth. Psalm 23 is like that. There is a depth and a poignancy and a purpose to Psalm 23. So rather than wait for the funeral, I wanted to share something of Psalm 23 with you all today. It's a reflective / devotional sermon. So there's some wisdom for the poignancy and the moments of life, and there's three things. We're going to be awake to the significance of the path you're on. Waking up, you're on a path, it matters. The importance of being properly restored. The psalm reflects on what it means to be restored. And thirdly, what it means to be prepared. So the first one, be awake to the significance of the path you're on, the steps that you're on. Everybody follows somebody, everybody's going somewhere. In a sense, this psalm, this song, is from a sheep's perspective. And one of the things that the Bible does is it calls a sheep an awful lot. And when it calls a sheep an awful lot, it's not complimentary, usually. It's not because we're fluffy and cute, although some of us are fluffy and cute. It's a wake-up call. When it talks about us being sheep, it's often in the context of wake up. It's a pointer towards direction. Because sheep, I don't know if you know this, I don't know if you've ever spent any time watching sheep, they're stupid. In the best possible way. They forget where their home is. That's like kind of thing drunk people do. They forget where their home is. They get lost, think about this, in square fields. They get lost in a square field. How'd you get lost? This is sheep. No, that's not sheep. There you go, that's sheep. And the stupidest thing about sheep, and keep that image up just to make this point hit home, the stupidest thing about sheep, and this is what we're going to think about, is that they don't actually know that they're stupid. The sheep, if you could speak to them, don't try it, they would tell you that they're doing all right. They would tell you that they've got things together. The Bible is making a point. It's getting us to think about the fact that we might be like sheep. And the Bible says, us humans have a disposition to end up getting lost and not know it. We can wander off, get lost, and not know about it. If you've read any history, you'll see the way that it repeats, that we get lost and we don't know it, and we do the same things over and over again, whether it be wars or ways of thinking or whatever it is. We get lost and we don't know it. If you've kept a diary, you will look back and realize that we get lost and we don't know it, and we do it over and over again. But the Bible makes a really poignant assertion, I think, in this psalm about our situation as human beings. Not only do we get lost without knowing it, but we can find, and this is part of the message of this psalm, we can find all we could ever want, all we could ever need, and be unaware of that as well. We can get lost and not know it. Think about the pivoting situation that's put before us. We can be lost and not know it, and we can have, just consider the psalm, maybe we could pop the sheep off and the text back up for a second, and we can have all that we could ever want, and we could be unaware of it. We can have everything that we want. Verse number 1, the Lord is my shepherd. What do you lack? I lack nothing. Just consider how the psalm and how the psalm floats and the picture it paints for us. There's no threat. There's no fear. There's no darkness that you can't be completely at peace in. The worst moment of your life, the worst bit of your journey, This is what the psalm suggests is true for us. This can be true for us. The worst thing that comes along, the worst couple of years of your life, the worst moments of your life, you can be contented. You can be confident. You can be full of life. And as we get towards the end of the psalm, you can even be in the worst possible circumstances, feasting, even overflowing with joy. This is the promise that's out there for us. Just be real for a second, because we spout these things on a Sunday. Is that how it feels? If you're a Christian thinking about faith, is that how it feels to you? Tomorrow when you get to the staff room, do you feel that close to this kind of joy? Do you feel that alive in your faith, that certain in your faith? Or do you feel a bit wobbly when you think about your faith? I'm overcome by bad traffic. I can become annoyed and defeated in life by bad traffic. I can lose my confidence watching Casualty. One throwaway comment can empty me. I can have one little worry in my head and I can be completely ruined by it. If we're honest, a lot of the time, I say we're happy that our faith just keeps on going. We're happy just to stay in the game, Christian speaking. If there's nice people around, if there's a nice little Christian community, if we've got a good band and we've got all of that, then bingo, I'll take that, that'll do. But think about this. If the Lord is my shepherd, if Jesus is my guide for life, and I look at what he's done, and he's proved God's love to me, I know that there's a God up there who loves me. If he gives every moment meaning, this is my experience. God, if we believe about Jesus, what we hear about Jesus, then every moment has meaning and purpose. And if Jesus faces down death, and if he gets up from death, and if he leaves the door to hope open for all time, look what we have. And we can have all of that now. We're known. We can be known. We can be loved. We can be kept. We can have purpose. We can have hope no matter what. Do you see the juxtaposition? Do you see the pivot that we're in life? We can want for nothing. And this is my experience, and we can just forget that that's a possibility. God says you can have all of that, and we can put it out of our minds, and we can be crazy lost and head into lostness as human beings, and we can have no idea. The wisdom, I think, part of the wisdom of this psalm is that life is a journey that counts. The paths that you're taking matter. You're following somebody. You're on the road. You're making decisions. You're heading in a certain direction. Every step matters. You see it in verse 3. The right path that David talks about there in verse 3, it sounds to me at least a lot like the narrow one that Jesus spoke about. Do you know when Jesus talks about the broad and the narrow roads? It's out of our way. It's against the flow. It's a hard path to take. We often miss it. And then there's that lovely detail there in verse 3 that you might need a guide for it. Have you ever been on a walk where you need a guide? Have you ever, most of you going, no, I would never do that. That's suicide. I would never put myself in that position. I think I've done it once. And when you're going on a walk where you need a guide, you listen hard. You follow exactly in the footsteps. Every step counts. The truth about this story is the walk that we're on needs a guide. You're on a walk that needs a guide. Before us is life, and before us is death. Every step that we take is a step in one direction. And the wisdom of this psalm says, just think about where you're going. Think about what is before you. Going to settle just for being lost in the clouds? Going to wander off and not know it? It doesn't promise you prosperity, I don't think. It doesn't promise you that everything will be all right, but it promises that you can have peace, even in the most difficult times, and you can have that now. And it says to us, think about your steps. Point number 1, Psalm 23, think about your steps. Point number 2, the importance of being restored. The importance of being properly restored. And as I say this, I can see everybody looking back and saying, yeah, we're on to that, Ash. I'm aware of the importance of being restored. We've got human resources now. We're over this. We're all over this. We've got welfare in our workplaces. We're onto it. We've got therapy. And we've got, best of all, the expression of the moment, we've got me time. We are on to personal care. We are on to our restoration. A little girl ran up to me outside the cast ground the other week, and she gave me an Andy's Man Club card. And I thought to myself, oh, that's nice, for a second. And then I thought, do I look unwell? Do I look vulnerable? And actually what it was, it might be a little bit true, but actually what it was, we're on to this. We are on to the importance of being restored. We know that we have got to get to the bottom of things as a culture. We have realized that we have got to get to the bottom of things. A few interesting things about Jesus, just as we think about that, those kind of things. First thing, he didn't do any miracles to impress anybody. I would, wouldn't you? If I had the gift, if I had that up my sleeve, if I had water into wine, how do you resist that? He doesn't do any miracles to impress anybody. His miracles exclusively are to point to something or to restore someone. Jesus was in the restoration business, and when people came to him to be restored, to have their quarrels put back together, or to have their lives put back together, or their relationships put back together, or even their physical bodies put back together, and they were mostly looking for a quick fix, like often we are, way before it was in vogue. And though it would often cause huge problems and huge consternation, what Jesus would do exclusively with everybody he met, mental health, welfare, well-being, Jesus would get to the bottom of it. Even when he's dealing with somebody who's in front of him with real, obvious physical problems, Jesus would seek to get to the bottom of it, beyond the physical, beyond the surface. He would seek to get to the bottom of it. There's this brilliant story about a group of guys who brought a paralyzed man to Jesus. Maybe you know this story. They strapped him to a stretcher. They were like, we need to get this guy to Jesus because they'd heard about the miracles that he'd done. And in the end, to get him to Jesus, they had to smash the roof in to get him there. They had to drop him down in front of him. And as he's laid there before Jesus, just lame on the floor, there's no explanation needed for his situation. It's blatantly obvious the difficulty that this man has. And yet, what does Jesus start off by doing? He tells him, get this, would you be able to cope with this? Jesus looks at him and says, you're forgiven. Does that look like his problem? Does that look like the overt problem that he has or we often have? He says that you're forgiven, and then he just waits. And as he waits, the room explodes. Everybody's mind starts to melt. And just to show that God's got total authority and total power, he heals him as well. What does Jesus do? He doesn't just do a temporary job. It's not a quick fix. Like the restoration show that's on television sometimes. Jesus does a full restoration job on this guy. He starts at the core of him. This guy doesn't just get up and jump around, which would be fantastic, but not fantastic forever. This guy has peace with the whole world. That's where he starts from. This guy has got peace with the whole world. Everything he's ever done, he's at perfect peace with. Everything that might happen to him in the future, all of the troubles, all of the wrong turns, all of the darkness that he might face, he's at perfect peace with it. And he's got this miracle moment to look back on, this God figure that has healed him, that means he's going to always be on that journey. What has happened? I think it's verse 2 of the text. His soul's been restored. It's not just his limbs that's been restored. It's not just his health that's been restored. His soul is being restored. We've gone on a bit of a journey in terms of terminology about our mental health, I think, and it's helped us on the journey. It started off pretty ugly in the 80s when we described mental health, and now it's become quite a positive, fashionable thing. We've got mindfulness, got me time, we've got holidays, we do that as well, got therapists. But just balance all those things up with the prospect of a restored soul. When David speaks about the soul, when we read about the soul in texts like this, it's like the essence of you, your original, authentic self, you at your purest form, the bit of you that should be pure and stay pure and shouldn't get messy, but does get messy. Gets sort of tainted with prejudice, guilt, and fear. Have you ever felt that? The you on the inside, when that gets messed up as well, how awful is that? How tricky is that to fix? See what David's joy is? David says, this God doesn't just fix me on the outside. He restores my soul. He puts my soul back together. He means I can look at the world again without a cynical eye, with love in my heart. I can just be peaceful. I can be a person of peace. I can have confidence in the world. Because it starts with the miracle of our forgiveness for us. We can always come back to it. There's a sense in which when we do business with God, because of the miracle of our forgiveness, because of that storyline, restoration is an ongoing thing for us. In the text, the idea is that it's present continuous tense. That's the grammatical bits and bobs. Soul restored. It's not just a one-off. It's not just a temporary fix. For David and for us, our souls are being restored. That is the business that's at work if we've got faith. God's not just decorating us. He's not just tightening us up. Our souls are being restored. So my recommendation, the little bit of wisdom I'd give you is get some me time if you can. I love a bit of me time. Get some mindfulness. Get as much mindfulness as you can. But I reckon at one bit, you're going to need to get to the bottom of it. It'll just keep coming back around. You're going to keep on, as we as a human race are searching to try and get to the bottom of it, to get to the soul of it. I can't afford a therapist who can get me there. But with Jesus, he will only start there. We're being restored. Last thing that we see is what it means to be prepared. So read with me verse 4 through 6. You might be familiar with this. You might have heard this before. This might be an oft-read passage of the Bible. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And just see the picture for a sec, if you're still with me. If you've ever been anxious, if you've ever had any anxiety, if you've ever had something in front of you that would cause you to have worry, one of the things that happens, I would bet my bottom dollar that this has happened to a lot of you, is that you lose your appetite. Have you had that? Worry comes, your stomach's in knots, and you lose your appetite. It's quite a normal thing, I think. That's what the therapist told me anyway. Here is a picture of somebody, David, who's facing ultimate anxiety. Do you see the list of things that he declares in front of him? This is an anxious man. It's King David. It's the warrior King David. But he's terrified in this moment. And he writes truth. He reveals himself, and he's facing absolute fear, pure evil, enemies. Not just, we don't really have enemies, do we? But he had enemies, people hunting him down for death. He's facing real darkness. He's alone, and he's facing death. And what does God do in this moment? It's beautiful. God pulls out the picnic blanket. He dusts it down. He takes his time to dust it down. He pulls out some strawberry jam and some fine bread, and he says, let's just sit down and eat. We're going to be fine. We're going to do great. We're going to be fine. And David, in pictorially, feels this, and he realizes, actually, he is going to be fine. He can sit down and eat, and he should sit down and eat. See verse 6? Because he's not finished there. This is not the end of King David. He's got further to go. He's got more joy before him. One of the great assurances that we have as Christians, and I'm putting this to you if you're not a Christian, as Bible believers, that phrase sounds a bit like I'm bashing people over the head, but you know what I'm trying to say. As people who hold on to God's word and say that this is truth, is that God's word, this is one of our big hopes, is that God's word bears out over time. It rings true. Prophecies that are declared come through. It manifests itself. It proves true. There's a picture that we're going to see in a second. I got this off of, this was on Twitter somewhere. Here is a list of all of the prophecies in the Bible that are declared and then come true in the New Testament. It's a beautiful picture, but it's an amazing truth. And we have that in this part of this psalm. Something is said way back that has a beautiful truth about it, an incredible ring of truth that means that we can not just think that we're guessing at faith, that we can have concrete hope in it. David, as he wrote this, wasn't really writing about a picnic with God. I embellished that a little bit. He was writing about the real comfort and confidence that comes when you hold tightly onto the promises of God. That's what he was writing about. As I hold onto these promises of God, as I walk with him day by day, I am comforted and I am assured. And the meal would kind of signify that. And those words, Psalm 23, has been a source of comfort for people for thousands of years. But I'm not sure that David really knew what he was saying. Maybe somebody will tell me that he did. Maybe he did know. Maybe he had a gift and maybe he knew what was coming. But my belief is that he didn't. It was just that God did and he'd planned it. That God would prepare a table to bring comfort in the face of death and evil. That he'd prepare a way for Jesus to come. And Jesus would come to this feast and he'd be alone, like David. Darkness would descend, like David. Enemies would be all around, like David. Death would loom, and yet, beautifully and enough to change the world forever, love would win. God's cup would overflow, Jesus would be raised, and a feast that would last till now and forever began. That's what, we're not taking it this week, but it might have been nice. That's essentially what communion is. When we take communion together, we are holding on to his promises. It's part of what communion is. We're holding on to his promises, knowing that no matter how dark it gets down the line, we will always have an eternal hope. What does it mean to be prepared? Is there something we need to do? I'm not the best person to be prepared, if I'm really honest. I went into the courthouse in Leeds, where I got a security check the other day, and I had a penknife in my bag. It's about the worst thing, the least prepared person on the human planet. Nobody has that. I need to be more prepared. I can't just leave it all in God's quarters. There's things that we should prepare for. But there are lots of things that we can't prepare for. There are things coming up for us that no level of preparation will cover us. But here's the good news. Here's our joy and our hope. He has prepared. This is how we are prepared. We walk with him. He's prepared a place, he's prepared a way, and he's prepared a savior. Follow him. The one thing that you notice as you read through the psalm, I've read it a million times, and I've always thought, you know that way you do that thing where you just relate it to you really quickly. You go to you first. It's about me, it's about me, it's about me. And then you read the psalm over, and I would challenge you to do it when you get home. It's all about him. It's what he does. We need to find him. Let's be restored. Let's be prepared. And let's watch our steps.